We've seen all this stuff about attacking a web server. Let's put it together now in sort of a summary. Let's talk about web server pen testing. So, of course you're going to pen test a web server. Now, the scope of your pen test might say only the public server, only the private server. So there might be some web servers that are off limits, depending upon what your engagement is. But when you do pen test a web server, and quite honestly, there might be servers that have a web server running when they shouldn't. It's just sitting there by default, like IIS. So you try to identify, analyze, and report web server vulnerabilities. So you go through methodical, repeatable tests, all the things we've been discussing. Try to work through all of the different vulnerabilities. And remember how we saw that whole stack of vulnerabilities. Web servers, especially because of their public-facing nature, because they're in a DMZ, unless they're an intranet internal portal, they have all of these dependencies. And we saw a whole stack of possible threats from just the environment and policy or lack of policy and the existence or lack of existence of network protections, to the network, to the box, to the OS, to the web server service, to the apps on top, third-party products, all these ancillary support things like DNS and firewalls. So you want to make sure that you check all these moving parts. And as you're zooming in on the web server itself, go through all the things we've discussed, from trying to go after the OS to scanning and password cracking and brute forcing and trying to go after defaults and permissions and policies that exist or don't exist. So you want to verify vulnerabilities and identify the web infrastructure and help remediate those vulnerabilities. So you identify the target. You search for target information on open sources. If necessary, do some social engineering and query who is. And after you've done all the testing, using all the methods we've talked about, of course, document your information. You'll want to fingerprint the web server. You'll want to crawl websites. You'll want to enumerate all the directories. You'll want to try to do directory traversal attacks. You're going to look out for configuration files that you can take advantage of. You'll do vulnerability assessments and vulnerability scans. You'll try to do HTTP response splitting. Now remember, there are tools for all of this. You don't have to do these just from scratch on a command prompt. You'll do web cache poisoning and try to crack the passwords, crack authentication for the web server or the web app. You'll try to brute force services like SSL and FTP and HTTP and other things. Brute forcing across the network, remember, is a high-speed dictionary attack using something like Hydra or Brutus or Medusa. And you'll try to do session hijacking. You'll try to launch man-in-the-middle attacks or test the actual web apps themselves. Try to read web server logs and exploit any vulnerable frameworks. And, of course, document your findings. There are a number of web server pen testing tools. There's Core Impact Pro, Immunity Canvas, Arachne, which is actually really good against web apps. There's Nikto. There are any number of Nmap scripts. There's Metasploit Pro. So you have a lot of opportunities here. So let's review what we know. Web servers are vulnerable to attacks against all sorts of things: the OS, the web server itself, the web apps, supporting services like DNS, client applications and browsers. Common attacks would be distributed denial of service, password cracking, response splitting, session hijacking, brute forcing, which is a part of password cracking, unless you can get locally and you can do a local password crack, defacement, directory traversal. So you use a multi-layered approach when defending a web server. And with that, let's get on to our lab, hacking web servers.